Ashes in the Archive. It began with smoke, not from a village set ablaze by war or the embers of a witch's pyre, but from the walls of a church, one that had stood in quiet dignity for almost 800 years. No fighting, no thunder, just silence. And then the slow breath of fire rising through the stone. The locals said it was an accident. Old wiring, maybe lightning, something mundane. But those who remembered the church, truly remembered it, knew there hadn't been a storm. And the library, the part that burned first, had no electricity at all. No books were salvaged, no documents survived. Nothing but the cracked metal of rusted shelving and the blackened bones of charred parchment. The fire had been so hot, they said, that the marble floor blistered. The ash hung in the air for days. When it finally settled, it coated everything: pews, altars, even the face of a weather-worn statue said to have wept blood during the Black Plague. But this wasn't the first time the church had hidden something in flames. Centuries earlier, its doors were sealed during a trial the Vatican never acknowledged. A trial that involved no judges, no witnesses, and only one sentence: silence. The records from that day were locked away, deep beneath the nave, in a vault guarded by chains and prayer. They were never meant to be found. And now, thanks to fire, they never will be. Unless we start asking why a church, meant to preserve, to remember, would go to such lengths to forget. Why a building so sacred would choose, again and again, to burn its own memory to the ground. And what, exactly, it was trying to erase. The vaulted records. The library that burned wasn't large. It didn't have stained glass ceilings or marble columns. No tourists took selfies beside its shelves. It was a cold, narrow room tucked behind the apse, down a set of stone stairs too steep for the elderly to use. No signs pointed to it. No plaques marked its history. You had to know it was there. And for centuries, only a handful did. The priests called it the vault, though it wasn't a vault in the usual sense. There was no treasure, no gold, just shelves, rows and rows of them, filled not with theology, but testimony. Letters, ledgers, seals, names written in careful Latin across brittle parchment. Some were no bigger than a hand. Others stretched so long they had to be rolled, tied, and shelved with iron weights. What they documented was not doctrine. These weren't the musings of saints or the minutes of councils. These were things the church did not speak of. Confessions taken under pressure, witness statements buried by silence, records of trials never held publicly. Men and women accused not of heresy, but of witnessing something they weren't meant to see. There was a girl once, 14. Her file was still intact before the fire. The ink had faded, but you could still read it if you turned the page under a slant of candlelight. She was found wandering near the monastery wall, barefoot, her dress torn, repeating one phrase over and over: "They buried him alive." It wasn't clear who she meant. The monks who wrote the file did not ask. They documented her words, gave no comment, and at the bottom of the page they wrote a single word in red: submissa, suppressed. Her name never appears again. She was not alone. Over the centuries, the vault gathered records like that. Not because the church wanted to preserve them, but because it couldn't destroy them without someone noticing. So instead, it buried them, labeled them, filed them away in the one place no one looked, under the house of God. And for a long time, it worked. Until someone, decades ago, broke the seal. Not a priest, not a bishop, a scholar. He had been granted access to the parish to study funeral rites from the 1400s. What he found was not a liturgical manual. It was a map. A chart of burial plots that didn't match any known graveyard. A symbol marked in ink darker than all the rest. Not a cross, not a star, something older. He asked about it once, just once. The archivist smiled, then locked the door behind him. The scholar never returned. Years later, his name was found scratched into the back of a pew. Just the initials, nothing more. But the story didn't die. Because a question had already been planted, and once it takes root, truth has a way of surviving fire. The crime. No one knows exactly when it happened.
There are no dates carved in stone, no public trials, no papal decrees, just fragments, lines copied into margins, symbols that show up in the wrong places, silence where names should be.
But if you trace the pattern, if you gather what little escaped the fire, a shape begins to form.
It begins in the 14th century, a time of plague, of famine, of fear thick enough to bend entire kingdoms. The church held more power than kings, because it claimed power over the soul, and in one valley far from Rome, that power was challenged. Not by an army, not by heretics, but by something older than both. The earliest mention comes from a letter written in 1348, just after the first wave of the Black Death. It was addressed to a bishop, though the name had been scraped away. The writer, anonymous or carefully erased, describes a chapel in the hills where villagers gathered to pray. Nothing strange at first, until the prayers stopped. The writer says, "They no longer ask for mercy, they speak to something that answers." That line alone was enough to damn it. A visit was ordered, but when the monks arrived, the chapel was empty. No blood, no bodies, just a circle drawn on the floor in ash. At its center, teeth. Human, filed to sharpness, some still rooted in bone. No one was arrested. There was no one left to arrest, but what followed was worse. Over the next 3 months, 5 children disappeared from nearby villages, then 2 priests, then a choir, always at night, always near the old chapel. The valley emptied itself out. Livestock fled, crops withered, even the crows left. The Vatican sent word that the place was cursed. It was to be sealed and forgotten, but one record, a funeral inventory, unsigned, mentions an emergency interment beneath the church itself. No bodies, no names, just quantities. 9 coffins, unblessed, lead-lined, buried in silence. And then the seal was broken, not by time, but by greed. In 1651, a noble family petitioned the diocese to renovate the church's crypt as a family vault. Money changed hands, locks were removed, floors lifted. What they found is not described. But something was taken out. Whatever it was not blessed. It was not buried. It was moved. And after that, people began to whisper of strange things again, just like before. Cattle found turned inside out, water running black at dawn. A boy who slept for 7 days and woke speaking Latin he never learned. But this time, there were no letters, only fire. The parish building next to the church caught first, then the priest's home, then the archive,
and finally, the library. The fire burned through everything but the stone vault. That part remained, but the door was sealed again. The new lock has no key, the church paid for it in gold, and no one has spoken of it since. When you listen close in the courtyard, on cold nights, you'll hear it. A faint sound, almost like pages turning. The cover-up. Not every crime is hidden in darkness. Some are buried in plain sight, disguised as ritual, as renovation, as reverence. That's how the church did it. Not with denials, not with fire alone, but with paperwork. After the final blaze, a new record appeared. It was clean, official, stamped, archived. It described the fire as accidental, blamed faulty lamps, claimed the damage was contained. It made no mention of the vault, the coffins, or the centuries of records gone with the smoke. A second document followed, authorizing the permanent sealing of the lower level for safety reasons. It didn't say what was unsafe. It didn't have to. No one asked. 3 weeks later, the parish was reassigned to a new order. The surviving clergy were moved, retired, transferred to monasteries with no names on public maps. A new priest was brought in, young, foreign, unconnected. His sermons were short, his doors always locked. The bell tower was rebuilt, taller than before. And when pilgrims asked about the fire, they were told there had been nothing of value lost. But value is a strange thing. To some, it means gold. To others, it means silence. One man, an assistant archivist who helped sort the library's remains, later confessed to having seen something he wasn't meant to. Not in the vault, in the sacristy. A box, iron-bound, heavy enough that 2 men were required to lift it. He was told it contained relics. But when he touched the surface, he said, "It burned cold." 2 days later, he resigned his post and left the church. He changed his name, moved to another country, died within the year. No obituary was printed. His notes were never found. But his journal, small, handwritten, and half-burned, was hidden inside a hollowed-out hymnal, discovered by accident when a restorer tried to mend the spine. There were only 4 pages left intact. On the last one, dated years before the fire, he wrote, "They've stopped trying to destroy it. Now they preserve it, guard it, feed it." The rest of the sentence was scorched away. What exactly it referred to, no one knows, or no one will say. But the fact that it was guarded, protected, hidden beneath a church, that says enough. The aftermath. Today, the church still stands. The stones have been cleaned, the pews replaced. New icons hang where the old ones melted. Tourists walk in and see nothing strange, just stained glass, incense, and quiet. The smell of ash is long gone, or maybe it was never there for them. But for those who know what burned beneath, the silence feels heavier. Local children don't play near the north wall. Dogs hesitate near the rear steps. And sometimes, late in winter, a strange mist clings to the lower courtyard, even when the rest of the city is dry. People say it's just the cold. People always say that. There are visitors who come, not many, and never in groups. Some carry notebooks, others, old maps. They ask questions about the library, the vault, the renovations. The staff gives polite answers, always the same. There's nothing left. But the staff doesn't linger after dark. In 1996, a woman from Germany visited the church on pilgrimage. She never mentioned why she came. She lit 3 candles, knelt in the last row, and stayed silent for nearly an hour. When she rose, she left a folded note on the bench. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It read, "I forgive you, even if he won't." Her name was never recorded. But 2 days later, a parish ledger was found in the confessional, open to a blank page. In the center, written in ink too fresh for the age of the book, were the words, "I remember." The page was torn out before morning. The priest on duty said he never saw who wrote it, but in interviews years later he admitted something else. Every year on the anniversary of the fire, a light flickers behind the sealed vault door. It doesn't last long, just a moment, long enough to suggest something still moves on the other side. He asked Rome for permission to investigate. The request was denied. No explanation, no comment, only a single sentence returned by courier. Sternly, "It is better not to disturb what was already buried twice." The echo. You won't find it in the guidebooks. Not the fire, not the vault, not the names that were erased. They don't teach it in seminary. It's not part of any official history. It lives only in margins. In scorched edges, torn records, whispered stories passed between archivists like contraband. But it lives, because truth has a strange habit of surviving fire. Not whole, not clean, but enough. Enough to feel something shift when you stand in the nave too long. Enough to sense that behind the stone, behind the icons, behind the polished silence, there's something older. Something that was never meant to be uncovered. And yet, it waits. Some say the vault is empty, that nothing remains, that the flames took it all. But how do you burn something that was already buried? Maybe it was never about hiding a body or a book. Maybe it was about hiding a decision. Because someone, long ago, chose silence, chose to lock it in, chose to protect the story, not to tell it. And every time the candles flicker without wind, every time the new priest stumbles mid-sermon with a word he doesn't recognize, every time a child draws a circle in the dirt without knowing why, something whispers back. A name, a date, a page that never made it to the archive. We don't know what was lost. We don't know what was buried. But the echo remains. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the fire started again. Not to destroy the truth, but to warn us. It's still there. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not for watching, but for staying, for listening, for remembering, for not turning away. This story didn't ask for your attention. It wasn't designed to entertain. It was only meant to be remembered. Most people will never hear what was buried here, and many who do will forget it by morning. But maybe you won't, because somewhere, behind sealed stone and erased names, what was lost still waits to be known. So if this stayed with you, share it. Not for the algorithm, not for me, but because some truths don't belong to history books. They belong to the living. And if you believe, some stories should never stay buried, subscribe. Not to support a channel, but to keep the fire from going out again.